Judge forgives fine for 96-year-old woman rushing 3-year-old daughter with respiratory arrest. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. It started with a video that no one could stop watching. On a humid Tuesday afternoon in the small Midwestern town of Grafton Falls, a police dashcam captured something extraordinary. An elderly woman, frail hands gripping the steering wheel, was pulled over on Route 9 after running 3 red lights and speeding through a school zone at 60 miles per hour. The officer approached, cautiously, expecting resistance, maybe confusion. What he found instead was Evelyn Marsh, 96 years old, tears streaming down her wrinkled face, cradling a small child in the back seat. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "My great-granddaughter, she can't breathe, I have to get her. I have to." "To the hospital." The officer radioed for an ambulance. Within minutes, paramedics arrived. The little girl, no more than 3 years old, was rushed to Mercy General Hospital. Evelyn was cited for multiple traffic violations. The fine? Nearly $1,000 for a woman living on a fixed income. It might as well have been $1 million. But the story didn't end there. 2 weeks later, Evelyn stood in the courtroom of Judge Clayton Hewitt, a man who had served Grafton Falls for over 25 years. Hewitt was known for his fairness, his compassion, and his ability to see beyond the letter of the law. He had presided over thousands of cases, custody battles, fraud accusations, petty theft, and had earned a reputation as a man who genuinely cared about justice. The courtroom was packed. Local news cameras lined the back wall. Everyone wanted to see what would happen to the grandmother who broke the law to save a life. Judge Hewitt reviewed the case silently. Then he looked up at Evelyn, standing small and trembling before the bench. "Mrs. Marsh," he began, his voice calm and steady. "I've read the details of your case. I've seen the dash cam footage, and I want you to know something." He paused. "You did what any loving person would do. You put a child's life above everything else. That takes courage." The courtroom held its breath. "I'm dismissing the charges," Hewitt continued. "But more than that." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. "I've learned that your great-granddaughter requires ongoing treatment that costs over $100,000. I'm paying for it. All of it." The room erupted. Gasps, applause, tears. Evelyn collapsed into her chair, sobbing. The video of the moment went viral within hours. Millions watched as Judge Clayton Hewitt became an overnight symbol of compassion in a world that so often felt cold and indifferent. News anchors called him a hero. Social media exploded with praise. Judge Hewitt trended for days. People sent donations, letters of gratitude, flowers. Clayton Hewitt was, in that moment, the best of humanity. But if you watched the video closely, if you paused it at just the right second, just after Evelyn thanked the judge, you'd notice something strange. A hesitation. When Evelyn said the words, "my great-granddaughter," she paused for just a fraction of a second. Her eyes darted off camera, searching for something or someone. And in that brief flicker, her expression wasn't relief. It was fear. Miles Garrett watched the video for the 3rd time, alone in his cluttered apartment, the glow of his laptop casting shadows across his face. He clicked rewind, watched it again. Something wasn't right. Miles Garrett was no stranger to being hated. 3 years ago, he had been a rising star at the Grafton Falls Tribune, known for his tenacity and his refusal to let powerful people hide behind carefully crafted public images. That all came crashing down when he exposed Mayor Richard Dalton for embezzling city funds intended for a children's hospital. Miles had the documents, the whistleblowers, the evidence. The story was airtight, but the town didn't care about the truth. They cared that Mayor Dalton had coached Little League for 15 years, that he'd shown up to every school play, every charity bake sale, every parade. He was beloved, and Miles had destroyed him. The backlash was swift and brutal. Death threats, hate mail. His editor received so many angry calls that the paper's phone lines jammed for 2 days straight. Miles was reassigned to writing obituaries and covering town hall meetings. His marriage fell apart 6 months later. His wife couldn't handle the constant hostility, the whispers at the grocery store, the way people crossed the street to avoid them. Now, at 48, Miles worked for a small, online news outlet that barely paid his rent. He lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled faintly of takeout and regret. His daughter, Emma, visited twice a month, and even she seemed embarrassed to be seen with him in public. So when the video of Judge Hewitt went viral, Miles felt that familiar itch, the one that told him something was off. He started with the basics, hospital records. "Mercy General Hospital, how can I help you?" The receptionist's voice was cheerful, practiced. "Hi, yes. I'm calling to verify a patient admission from 2 weeks ago. A child, 3 years old. Last name Marsh. Respiratory distress." A pause. Typing. "Can you spell the last name?" "Marsh." More typing. A longer pause. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't have any records of that patient." Miles frowned. "Can you check again?" It would have been an emergency admission. The child was brought in by ambulance. "I've checked, sir. There's no record of any pediatric respiratory emergency on that date." "Are you sure?" "Completely sure." Her tone shifted slightly, less friendly now. "Is there anything else I can help you with?" Miles hung up. He tried the county health department next, then the state medical registry. Then he called 3 other hospitals within a 50-mile radius, just in case the ambulance had been rerouted. Nothing. No records. No admission. No treatment. It was as if the child had never been sick at all. Miles sat back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Maybe the hospital was protecting patient privacy. Maybe the records were sealed for some legal reason. Maybe he was overthinking it. But then he remembered the hesitation in Evelyn Marsh's voice, the way her eyes had searched off camera, the way Judge Hewitt had smiled, not with joy, but with control. His phone buzzed, a text from his editor. "Don't even think about it." Miles stared at the message. His editor, Paul, had been with him through the Dalton scandal. Paul knew how Miles operated, and Paul knew that once Miles caught the scent of something wrong, he couldn't let it go. Miles typed back, "Think about what?" Paul's response came immediately. "Whatever conspiracy theory you're cooking up about Judge Hewitt. The man just paid $100K to save a kid's life. Leave it alone." Miles set the phone down. He pulled up the video again. This time he didn't watch Evelyn. He watched Hewitt, the judge's face was calm, composed, almost rehearsed. His hand moved to his jacket pocket with the confidence of someone who had practiced the motion. His eyes never left Evelyn, not even when the courtroom erupted in applause. Miles had covered enough trials to know what a genuine reaction looked like. This wasn't it. He opened a new document on his laptop and typed a single line. "Why are there no medical records for Lily Marsh?" Then he saved it, titled it Hewitt Investigation, and leaned back in his chair. His phone buzzed again. Paul, this time calling. Miles didn't answer. He knew what his editor would say. He knew what everyone would say, that he was bitter, that he was chasing ghosts, that he was trying to tear down a good man because he couldn't handle the fact that not everyone in power was corrupt. But Miles had learned something important over the years. When a story feels too perfect, it usually is. And this story, it was perfect. Too perfect. Miles drove to Mercy General Hospital on a gray Thursday morning, armed with nothing but a notebook and a press badge that hadn't meant much in years. The hospital was a sprawling complex on the edge of town, its white walls gleaming under fluorescent lights. Inside, the smell of disinfectant and recycled air greeted him. He approached the front desk where a young woman with tired eyes looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" "I'm Miles Garrett with the Grafton Observer. I'm doing a follow-up story on the Evelyn Marsh case. The grandmother who brought her great-granddaughter here a few weeks ago." The woman's expression shifted immediately. "I'll need to get a supervisor." She disappeared through a side door. Miles waited, watching nurses hurry past, their shoes squeaking on polished floors. 10 minutes later, a middle-aged man in a crisp white coat emerged. "Mr. Garrett, I'm Dr. Alan Fremont, Chief of Pediatrics. How can I help you?" Miles extended his hand. Fremont shook it, but his grip was brief, uncertain. "I'm trying to verify some details about the Marsh case. The little girl who was treated here for respiratory distress." Fremont's jaw tightened. "I'm afraid I can't discuss patient information without proper authorization." "I understand privacy laws, doctor. I'm not asking for medical details. I just need confirmation that she was treated here." Fremont glanced over his shoulder, then back at Miles. "Mr. Garrett, I really can't help you. Can't or won't." The doctor's face flushed. "I think you should leave." Miles didn't move. "Doctor, a judge paid $100,000 for a child's treatment. The public has a right to know that the money went where it was supposed to." Fremont hesitated. For a moment, Miles thought he might crack, but then the doctor straightened, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Come with me." They walked down a narrow hallway, past supply closets and empty exam rooms. Fremont stopped near a window overlooking the parking lot, his back to the main corridor. "Off the record," Fremont said quietly, "there was no child admitted that day, no respiratory emergency, no treatment." Miles felt his pulse quicken. "Then why?" "Because 3 days after the video went viral, this hospital received an anonymous donation of $200,000. Unrestricted funds. The board was ecstatic. We've been struggling with budget cuts for years." Fremont looked at Miles directly now, his eyes pleading. "We were told not to comment on the Marsh case, that it was for the child's privacy, that speaking publicly could jeopardize future donations." "Who told you that?" "The hospital's legal team. They said it came from the judge's office." Fremont swallowed hard. "Look, I don't know what's going on. Maybe the family took the girl to a private clinic. Maybe they didn't want publicity. I'm just trying to protect this hospital. We do good work here. We save lives. If we lose funding because of some media circus..." He trailed off. Miles studied him. Fremont wasn't lying. He was scared. Scared of losing his job. Scared of jeopardizing the hospital's future. He was a good man, caught in something he didn't understand. "Thank you, doctor," Miles said quietly. Fremont nodded and walked away quickly, shoulders hunched. Miles stood alone in the hallway, his mind racing. No medical records, an anonymous donation, a legal team silencing hospital staff. This wasn't about privacy. This was about control. He left the hospital and sat in his car for a long time, staring at his notebook. He'd written down 3 words: follow the money. His phone rang, unknown number. Miles answered. "Hello?" Silence. Then a voice, calm, measured, male. "Mr. Garrett, I'd advise you to be very careful about what you publish." "Who is this?" "Someone who wants to help you avoid making a mistake. Judge Hewitt is a good man. Grafton Falls loves him. You know what happens to people who attack beloved figures." Miles's hand tightened around the phone. "Is that a threat?" "It's friendly advice." The line went dead. Miles sat in the parking lot for another 20 minutes, heart pounding. He'd been here before. 3 years ago, after the Dalton story, the threats had started the same way, polite, veiled, almost reasonable. And then they'd escalated. But this time, Miles wasn't going to back down. He started the car and drove back to his apartment, his mind already forming the next steps. He needed help. He needed someone who could dig deeper into financials, someone who understood how money moved in the shadows. He needed Sophie Chen. Sophie had been his colleague at the Tribune before everything fell apart. She'd stood by him during the Dalton scandal, even when it cost her promotions and friendships. She was a forensic data analyst now, freelancing for legal firms and occasionally helping journalists with investigations. Miles pulled out his phone and texted her. "Need your help. Big story. You in?" Her reply came 30 seconds later. Always. Miles allowed himself a small smile. He didn't know what he was walking into, but he knew one thing for certain. Judge Clayton Hewitt's perfect story was starting to crack. The interview aired on a Tuesday night, prime time, on one of the major networks. Evelyn Marsh sat in a plush armchair. Her hands folded neatly in her lap, a box of tissues on the side table. The host, a woman with perfectly styled hair and a voice like warm honey, leaned forward with practiced empathy. "Mrs. Marsh, thank you so much for sharing your story with us tonight." Evelyn nodded, her eyes glistening. "Thank you for having me. Tell us in your own words what happened that day." Evelyn took a breath, not too deep, not too shallow, just enough to suggest emotion held barely in check. "I was watching Lily, my great-granddaughter, when she started having trouble breathing. She has asthma, you see. It comes on so suddenly sometimes." Her voice wavered. "I grabbed her and ran to the car. I knew I had to get her to the hospital. Every second mattered." The host nodded sympathetically. "And you drove as fast as you could." "I did. I know I broke the law. I know I could have hurt someone. But in that moment, all I could think about was saving her life." A single tear rolled down Evelyn's cheek. "She's all I have left in this world." The camera zoomed in on her face, the wrinkles, the trembling lip, the grandmother every viewer wished they had. "And then Judge Hewitt not only forgave you, but paid for Lily's treatment." "He saved her life," Evelyn's voice broke. "He didn't have to do that. He could have just dismissed the charges and sent me home. But he saw a child in need, and he acted. That's the kind of man he is." The host smiled warmly. "That's the kind of man America needs more of." The audience applauded. Miles watched from his apartment, his laptop balanced on his knees. He'd recorded the interview and was now watching it for the 4th time. Something was wrong. He paused the video and rewound 30 seconds. Watched Evelyn's face as she described Lily's breathing problems. Her eyes moved left, the direction people's eyes typically move when they're recalling a memory. Good. Natural. But then when she said, "She's all I have left in this world," her eyes moved right. Right meant construction, imagination, lying. Miles wasn't a body language expert, but he'd sat through enough witness testimonies to recognize the patterns. And Evelyn Marsh's patterns were off. He played the rest of the interview. The host asked about Lily's recovery. Evelyn described hospital visits, medications, follow-up appointments. Her answers were detailed, specific, confident. Too confident. Miles paused again, this time at the very end. The interview was over. The host was thanking Evelyn. The camera was pulling back for a wide shot, and in that brief moment, maybe 2 seconds, maybe less, Evelyn's face changed. The warm grandmother disappeared. Her eyes found one of the cameras. Not the main one. A secondary camera off to the side. And for just an instant, her expression shifted. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't relief. It was a look Miles had seen before, in courtrooms, on the faces of people who'd just testified against someone dangerous. It was fear and guilt. The screen faded to black as the credits rolled. Miles sat in silence. He rewound to that final moment and captured a screenshot. Evelyn's face, frozen in that unguarded instant. He stared at it for a long time. "Who are you really?" he whispered. His phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. "Found something. Call me." Miles dialed immediately. Sophie answered on the first ring. "Tell me you watched the interview," she said. "Just finished. What did you find?" "I ran a background check on Evelyn Marsh. Standard stuff. Property records, employment history, financials." Sophie paused. "Miles, she's broke. Like, legitimately broke. She's been living off Social Security for 15 years. No savings, no assets. Her house is in foreclosure. So how is she affording to care for a sick child?" "Exactly." Sophie's voice sharpened. "And here's the kicker. I looked up Lily Marsh in the county. Birth records. No match. I checked state databases. Nothing. I even ran her name through the Social Security registry." Miles felt his stomach tighten. What are you saying? I'm saying there's no record of Lily Marsh existing before 3 years ago. No birth certificate. No hospital records. Nothing. The line went quiet. Miles stared at the frozen image on his screen. Evelyn's fearful eyes staring into the camera. Sophie, he said slowly. Who the hell is this child? Miles spent the next 2 days digging through old newspaper archives, searching for any mention of Judge Clayton. Hewitt that predated his appointment to the bench. What he found was a career built on precision and careful public relations. Every article painted the same picture: a dedicated public servant, a compassionate leader, a man of unwavering integrity. But then, buried in a 2008 edition of the Grafton Falls Tribune, Miles found something different. A small article, barely 3 paragraphs, tucked between grocery store ads and obituaries. Local man acquitted in fraud case. Frank Delano, 42, was found not guilty yesterday of charges related to financial fraud after Judge Clayton Hewitt cited extenuating circumstances in his ruling. Prosecutors had presented evidence of falsified documents and misappropriated funds, but Hewitt's decision highlighted Delano's lack of criminal history and his role as a caretaker for his elderly mother. Delano could not be reached for comment. Miles read, Miles. It 3 times. Extenuating circumstances. That phrase kept appearing in Hewitt's cases. A legal umbrella broad enough to justify almost anything. He ran Frank Delano's name through public records. The man had disappeared from Grafton Falls shortly after the trial, but Miles traced him to a small town 60 miles away, Millbrook. 2 hours later, Miles was standing outside a rundown house with peeling paint and overgrown grass. He knocked. The door opened a crack. A man in his late 50s peered out, his face gaunt, his eyes suspicious. Frank Delano? The man's expression hardened. Who's asking? My name is Miles Garrett. I'm a journalist. I'd like to ask you about Judge Hewitt. Delano started to close the door. Miles spoke quickly. I know he helped you. I know you were acquitted 15 years ago. I'm not here to dredge up the past. I just need to understand. You don't understand anything. Delano's voice was sharp, bitter, but he stopped closing the door. Miles took a chance. Then help me understand. Delano stared at him for a long moment. Then reluctantly, he opened the door wider. 5 minutes, he muttered. Inside, the house was dim and cluttered. Delano gestured to a worn couch. Miles sat. Delano remained standing, arms crossed. I don't talk about that trial, Delano said. Not to anyone. Why not? Because I was guilty. The words came out flat, emotionless. The prosecutors had me dead to rights. I falsified invoices, moved money I shouldn't have touched. I was going to prison. But Hewitt acquitted you. Delano nodded slowly. He did. Why? I don't know. Delano's jaw tightened. The trial was almost over. I'd already accepted I was going away. And then something happened during the final arguments. The prosecutor, he just stopped. Like he forgot what he was going to say, and then Hewitt made his ruling. What do you mean the prosecutor stopped? I mean, he looked at Hewitt and it was like he'd been told to shut up. Delano shook his head. I walked out of that courtroom a free man, but I've never felt free. Since. Miles leaned forward. What happened after the trial? I left town. Hewitt's people told me it would be best if I kept a low profile. So I did. Delano's eyes were hollow. I owe him my life, Mr. Garrett, but I've spent every day since wondering what he wanted in return. Did he ever ask for anything? No. That's what scares me. Delano moved to the door, opening it. You should leave now. Miles stood. Mr. Delano, if you know something, I don't know anything, and neither do you. Delano's voice dropped to a whisper. Leave the past alone. You don't know where you're digging. The door closed. Miles stood on the porch, the autumn wind biting at his face. Frank Delano wasn't lying. He was terrified, and Judge Clayton Hewitt had owned him for 15 years. Miles published the article on a Friday morning. The headline read, "Questions Without Answers, the Evelyn Marsh Case." It was careful, measured. Miles didn't accuse anyone of wrongdoing. He simply laid out the facts. No hospital records for Lily Marsh, no birth certificate, an anonymous donation to Mercy General, a pattern of witnesses who disappeared after Judge Hewitt's rulings. He ended with a single question. Where is the truth? The reaction was immediate and vicious. Within an hour, the comment section exploded. Hundreds of angry responses flooded in, each one angrier than the last. "This is disgusting. A man does something good and you try to destroy him? Miles Garrett is a bitter hack who can't stand seeing someone else do the right thing. You should be ashamed of yourself. That judge saved a child's life." Miles tried to ignore them. He'd expected pushback. But then the phone calls started. His editor, Paul, called 6 times in 20 minutes before Miles finally answered. "What the hell were you thinking?" Paul's voice was sharp, furious. "I was thinking the public deserves the truth." "The public thinks you're a monster, Miles. We've had 3 advertisers pull out already. Do you have any idea what this is going to cost us?" "Paul, no, I defended you during Dalton. I stuck. My neck out for you, but this is career suicide." Paul paused. "Take the article down." "I'm not taking it down." "Then you're done. I can't protect you anymore." The line went dead. Miles sat in his apartment, staring at his phone. He knew this would happen. He knew the cost. But knowing didn't make it easier. That afternoon, Miles went to a coffee shop to clear his head. He ordered black coffee and sat by the window, watching people pass by on the street. A woman approached his table. She was in her 40s, dressed in a nurse's scrubs, her eyes red and swollen. "You're Miles?" "Garrett," she said. Miles nodded cautiously. "I am. You wrote that article about Judge Hewitt." "Yes." Her voice broke. "How could you? How could you do that to him?" People in the coffee shop started to turn, watching. "Ma'am, I'm just asking questions. He's a good man." Tears streamed down her face. "My brother was in his court 5 years ago. Hewitt gave him a second chance when no one else would. He changed my brother's life. And now you're trying to destroy him because—" "What? Because you need a story? Because you can't stand seeing someone do something kind?" Miles opened his mouth to respond, but she was already walking away, shoulders shaking. The entire coffee shop stared at him. Miles left his coffee untouched and walked out. That evening, Judge Hewitt held a press conference. Miles watched it live from his laptop. Hewitt stood behind a podium in the courthouse, flanked by the mayor and several prominent community leaders. He looked tired but composed, his voice steady and warm. "I want to address the recent article questioning my actions in the Evelyn Marsh case," Hewitt began. "First, let me say that I understand the role of journalism in holding public figures accountable. I welcome scrutiny, I welcome questions." He paused, letting the words settle. "But I also want to remind everyone what this case is really about: a frightened grandmother, a sick child, and a community that came together to help them. The details of Lily's medical treatment are protected by privacy laws, as they should be. I cannot and will not disclose her personal health information to satisfy curiosity." The crowd murmured in approval. "As for the money I donated, yes, I paid for her treatment. I did so privately, as I have done for others over the years. I don't do it for recognition. I do it because it's the right thing to do." Hewitt's eyes seemed to look directly into the camera. "I ask only that we remember compassion, that we remember kindness, and that we don't let cynicism poison the good that still exists in this world." The applause was thunderous. Miles closed the laptop. Hewitt had won, again. But as Miles sat in the darkness of his apartment, he noticed something in the background of the press conference footage. A woman standing behind Hewitt, partially obscured by the crowd. Diane, Hewitt's assistant. She wasn't applauding. She was staring at the floor, her hands clenched into fists. And when the camera panned away, Miles could have sworn he saw her wipe away a tear. Not a tear of pride, a tear of fear. Sophie Chen arrived at Miles's apartment on Sunday morning carrying 2 large coffees and a laptop bag that looked like it weighed 20 pounds. "You look like hell," she said, handing him a coffee. "Thanks." Miles stepped aside to let her in. "You didn't have to come all the way here." "Yes, I did. You're about to be crucified, and I'm not letting you go down without a fight." Sophie set her bag on the cluttered dining table and pulled out her laptop. "Besides, I found something you need to see." Miles sat across from her. "What is it?" Sophie opened a spreadsheet, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "After you published that article, I started digging deeper into Hewitt's case history. 25 years on the bench means thousands of rulings. Most are routine, traffic violations, small claims, custody disputes. But then I found these." She turned the screen toward Miles. The spreadsheet listed 8 cases, each highlighted in yellow. Names, dates, brief descriptions. "What am I looking at?" Miles asked. "Patterns." Sophie tapped the screen. "Look at the common threads. Case 1, 2009. A single mother facing eviction gets her case dismissed after Hewitt intervenes. She had a 6-year-old daughter with leukemia. Case 2, 2011. An elderly veteran about to lose his home in foreclosure. Hewitt rules in his favor, citing compassionate grounds. The veteran had stage 4 cancer." Miles leaned closer, reading. Sophie continued. Case 3, 2013. A young father accused of check fraud. Hewitt acquits him. The man's infant son needed a heart transplant. Case 4. They all involve sick people. Miles interrupted. "Children, elderly, terminal illnesses." "Exactly." Sophie's eyes were sharp. And in every single case, something unusual happened afterward. The mother who was facing eviction, her daughter's medical bills were mysteriously paid off by an anonymous donor. The veteran, his mortgage was forgiven by the bank, no explanation given. The young father, he received a job offer from a company owned by a prominent local businessman. A businessman who just happened to have a case pending in Hewitt's court 6 months later. Miles felt his pulse quicken. Hewitt used these people. Not just used. He orchestrated it. Sophie pulled up another document. I cross-referenced the beneficiaries with public records, campaign donations, business filings. Almost every person who received Hewitt's compassion was connected to someone influential. Politicians, business owners, lawyers, and in exchange for Hewitt's generosity, those influential people owed him favors. But the public only saw the compassion, Miles said quietly. Exactly. Every time Hewitt made one of these grand gestures, the media covered it. Local hero judge saves family from ruin. The stories went viral just like the Evelyn Marsh case. His reputation grew stronger with each one. And anyone who questioned it looked like a heartless cynic. Sophie closed the laptop and looked at Miles. He's been doing this for decades, using vulnerable people, sick kids, dying grandparents, as shields. Who's going to investigate a man who helps children with cancer? Miles sat back, his mind racing. We need to talk to these people, the ones he helped. I already tried. Sophie's expression darkened. 3 of them moved out of state within a year of their cases. 2 won't return my calls. 1 told me to stop harassing her. And 1, she hesitated. 1 is dead. Car accident 2016, single vehicle collision, no witnesses. The room went quiet. Miles stared at the spreadsheet. 8 cases, 8 vulnerable people, 8 perfect opportunities for Hewitt to build his untouchable image. This isn't just manipulation, Miles said. This is systematic, calculated. It's a network, Sophie agreed. And Evelyn Marsh is just the latest piece. Miles stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gray Grafton Falls skyline. Somewhere out there, Judge Clayton Hewitt was preparing for Monday morning. Court, smiling at constituents, shaking hands, playing the role he'd perfected over 25 years. but the mask was cracking. "We need more," Miles said. "We need someone who'll talk, someone who knows what Hewitt really is." Sophie nodded. "I'll keep digging into the financials. If money changed hands, there's a trail. There's always a trail." Miles turned back to her. "Be careful. Whoever's protecting Hewitt won't stop at phone calls." "I know." Sophie packed up her laptop. "But neither will we." After she left, Miles sat alone in his apartment staring at the list of names. 8 people. 8 stories of compassion and heroism. 8 lies. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found one name. Diane Mercer, Hewitt's assistant. The woman who'd looked so afraid during the press conference. Miles hesitated. Then he typed out a message. "Ms. Mercer, I know you're scared. But if you know something, please talk to me. People deserve the truth." He hit send before he could change his mind. The message showed as delivered. Then, a minute later, "Read." Miles waited. No response came, but somewhere across town, in a small apartment lit only by the glow of a phone screen, Diane Mercer stared at the message with trembling hands. And for the first time in 15 years, she considered telling the truth. Sophie called Miles at 6 in the morning. "I found one," she said, her voice crackling through the phone. "One of the people from Hewitt's cases, who's still local. And she'll talk." Miles was already pulling on his jacket. "Who?" "Rachel Whitmore, 2012. Custody battle involving domestic violence. Hewitt ruled in her favor, gave her full custody of her daughter. The case made headlines because Rachel's ex-husband was a city councilman. Hewitt was praised for standing up for the vulnerable against a powerful man. Where is she?" "About 40 minutes outside of town. I'll text you the address." They met at a small diner on the highway, then drove together to a modest neighborhood where the houses were old but well kept. Rachel Whitmore's home sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by a chain-link fence. A woman in her late 30s answered the door. She had dark circles under her eyes and the wary posture of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. "Ms. Whitmore," Miles said. "I'm Miles Garrett. This is Sophie Chen. Thank you for agreeing to see us." Rachel nodded but didn't smile. "Come in, quickly." Inside, the house was clean but sparse. A young girl, maybe 13, sat at the kitchen table doing homework. She looked up briefly when they entered, then returned to her work. Rachel gestured for them to sit in the living room and closed the door to the kitchen. "That's Emily," Rachel said quietly. "My daughter, the one Hewitt saved." The word came out bitter. Miles leaned forward. "Can you tell us what happened?" Rachel sat across from them, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "My ex-husband, Michael, was abusive. Emotionally, mostly, sometimes physically. I filed for divorce and sought full custody. Michael fought it. He had money, connections, power. I had nothing. And Hewitt presided over the case," Sophie said. "Yes. Everyone told me I didn't stand a chance. Michael's lawyer was expensive, ruthless. Mine was court-appointed, overworked." Rachel's voice trembled. But then, during the final hearing, something happened. Michael's lawyer. He didn't show up. No explanation. The judge asked for a recess, but Hewitt said no. He ruled in my favor on the spot. "That's a good thing, isn't it?" Miles asked gently. Rachel looked at him with hollow eyes. "I thought so, for about a week." "What do you mean?" "A few days after the ruling, a man came to my house. He said he was an associate of Judge Hewitt's. He congratulated me, told me how lucky I was. And then he gave me advice." She paused, swallowing hard. "He said it would be best if I didn't talk about the case publicly. That media attention might upset Emily, might cause Michael to appeal. He said Hewitt wanted to protect us." Miles exchanged a glance with Sophie. "Did you follow the advice?" Sophie asked. "Of course I did. I was terrified. Michael was furious, but he couldn't do anything. The ruling was final. I got my daughter back. I should have been grateful." Rachel's hands clenched. "But sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I think, what if it was all just theater? What if Hewitt didn't help me because it was right. What if I was just useful to him? Useful how? Miles asked. Rachel shook her head. I don't know. But 6 months after the ruling, Michael dropped dead of a heart attack. He was 42, healthy, no history of heart problems, and when I tried to ask questions, I was told to let it go, that I should be relieved. The room fell silent. Miles felt a chill run down his spine. Do you think Hewitt had something to do with it? I don't know what I think anymore. Rachel's voice broke. All I know is that my life changed because of that man, and I've spent 12 years wondering what the real price was. Sophie spoke carefully. Would you be willing to go on record, to testify about what happened? Rachel's face went pale. No, absolutely not. Ms. Whitmore, you don't understand. Rachel stood abruptly. I have a daughter. I have a life. I can't go against him. You have no idea what he's capable of. Miles stood too. Then help us understand. Please. Rachel walked to the window, staring out at the empty street. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, quietly, there were others, before me. Women who fought custody battles, people who went up against powerful men. Some of them won. Some of them disappeared afterward, moved away, stopped talking. One woman, I heard she tried to speak to a reporter. A week later, her car was run off the road. Survived, but barely. She never spoke again. Miles felt his stomach tighten. Do you remember her name? Rachel shook her head. I'm sorry, I can't help you, I can't risk it. She walked to the door and opened it. Miles and Sophie stood, understanding they'd been dismissed. Thank you for your time, Miles said. Rachel met his eyes one last time. Be careful, Mr. Garrett. Hewitt, doesn't just have power. He has people who protect that power, and they won't let you destroy him without a fight. As they walked back to the car, Sophie spoke first. She's terrified. She has every right to be, Miles said. They drove in silence for several miles before Sophie spoke again. Miles, what if we're wrong? What if we're chasing shadows? Miles thought of Rachel's hollow eyes, of Frank Delano's fear, of Diane's tears. We're not wrong, he said. We're just finally seeing the truth. Miles returned home that night to find a cardboard box sitting on his doorstep. No label. No return address. Just a plain brown box sealed with packing tape. He looked up and down the hallway. Empty. Silent. Miles carried the box inside, his instincts screaming at him to be cautious. He set it on the kitchen table and stared at it for a full minute before finally cutting the tape with a knife. Inside were stacks of papers, old newspaper clippings yellowed with age, court documents, photocopies of handwritten notes, and photographs. Miles spread them across the table, his heart pounding. Most of the documents were records of cases from the late 1990s and early 2000s, before Hewitt became a judge. Names Miles didn't recognize, legal proceedings that seemed routine. But then he found the photograph. It was taken at some kind of formal event, a charity gala or fundraiser. The photo was dated June 1998, stamped in the corner. In the center of the image stood a group of men in tuxedos, champagne glasses raised, smiling for the camera. Miles recognized two of them immediately. Harold Vance, a prosecutor who'd been convicted of bribery in 2003 and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Gregory Lamb, former mayor of a neighboring town, arrested for money laundering in 2005. He'd fled the country before trial and never been found. And there, standing slightly apart from the group but clearly part of the conversation, was a younger Clayton Hewitt. He wasn't smiling. He was watching, observing. His expression was calm, controlled, calculating. Miles grabbed his phone and called Sophie. I need you to come over now. She arrived 20 minutes later. Miles showed her the photograph. Sophie studied it closely, then pulled out her laptop. Vance and Lamb, both convicted, both disappeared from public life. She typed rapidly. And Hewitt? He was appointed to the bench in 2001, 3 years after this photo was taken. Right after Vance and Lamb started getting investigated, Miles said. Sophie looked up. He distanced himself before they fell. He knew what was coming. Miles paced the small kitchen. He was part of their network. He had to be. But somehow he got out clean. More than clean. He became a judge. Sophie scrolled through her screen. Look at this. Hewitt's appointment was fast-tracked. Normally it takes years of vetting, recommendations, political maneuvering. But Hewitt went from private attorney to the bench in 18 months. Someone owed him a favor, Miles said. Or he had something on someone. Sophie continued digging. I'm cross-referencing everyone in this photo. If Hewitt was connected to Vance and Lamb, there have to be others. Miles picked up the photograph again, studying each face. 12 men. 12. Miles. How many of them were corrupt? How many had escaped justice? And how many had helped Hewitt build his untouchable reputation? His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Miles answered. Hello? Silence. Then the sound of breathing. Who is this? Miles demanded, a voice low and calm. You received a package. Miles's blood ran cold. Who are you? Someone who wants you to understand what you're dealing with. The voice paused. That photograph is just the beginning. Clayton Hewitt has been protected for a long time, by people more powerful than you can imagine. Then why are you helping? Me? Because some of us are tired of protecting monsters. The line went dead. Miles stood frozen, phone in hand. Sophie looked at him, alarmed. What is it? Someone's watching me. They know I got the box. They know what's in it. Sophie's face paled. Miles, maybe we should... No. Miles set the, phone down. We're not stopping. Not now. That night, Miles couldn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by documents, photographs, notes scrawled in his own handwriting. Around 3 a.m, he walked to the window and looked out at the street. A black sedan was parked across the road. Engine off. Lights off. But someone was sitting in the driver's seat. Miles stepped back from the window, heart racing. They were watching him, and they wanted him to know it. He grabbed his phone and typed a message to Sophie. They're outside my apartment. Don't come here tomorrow. Work. From home. Her reply came instantly. Are you safe? Miles stared at the question for a long time before typing, for now. He returned to the window. The sedan was still there, and Miles understood something with absolute clarity. He'd crossed a line. There was no going back now. Either he exposed Clayton Hewitt, or Hewitt destroyed him first. The funeral was on a cold Wednesday afternoon. Thomas Brennan had been a fixture at the Grafton Falls courthouse for 38 years, a court clerk who knew every judge, every lawyer, every case that passed through those halls. He'd retired 5 years ago and died quietly in his sleep at 74. Miles attended because Brennan had been one of the few people who'd spoken to him during the Dalton scandal. A kind word in the hallway, a nod of understanding. Small gestures, but they'd mattered. The service was held at St. Catherine's Church, a modest building with stained glass windows and wooden pews that creaked when you sat down. Miles arrived late and slipped into a back row, keeping his head down. The church was full. Lawyers in dark suits, courthouse staff, retirees, and at the front, sitting in the place of honor reserved for dignitaries, was Judge Clayton Hewitt. Miles watched him from across the room. Hewitt looked somber, respectful. He stood when it was time to speak, delivering a eulogy that was warm and personal. He spoke of Brennan's dedication, his humor, his quiet wisdom. The congregation nodded, some wiping away tears. It was a perfect performance. After the service, people gathered outside the church. Miles stood near the parking lot, preparing to leave, when a voice called out behind him. Mr. Garrett. Miles turned. Judge Hewitt approached with an easy smile, his hand extended. Miles hesitated, then shook it. Hewitt's grip was firm, confident. I didn't expect to see you here, Hewitt said warmly. Did you know Thomas well? Not well, but he was kind to me when few people were. He was a good man. Hewitt's expression softened. We need more people like him in this world. People who see beyond the headlines and the noise. Miles said nothing. Hewitt glanced around, then lowered his voice slightly. Walk with me a moment? It wasn't a request. They walked away from the crowd, toward a small garden beside the church. The air was cold, the trees bare. Hewitt spoke first. I want you to know that I harbor no ill will toward you, Mr. Garrett. I understand you're doing your job, asking questions, holding people accountable. That's important work. But, Miles said. Hewitt smiled faintly. But I also want you to understand something. This town, these people, they need hope. They need to believe that good still exists, that compassion matters, that someone in power can still do the right thing. He paused, his eyes meeting Miles's. When you publish articles questioning that, you're not just questioning me. You're questioning their faith in the system, in justice, in humanity itself. What if their faith is misplaced? Miles asked quietly. Hewitt's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his eyes, something cold. Then you'd be condemning them to despair, Hewitt said, and I don't think you want that. You have a daughter, don't you, Emma? Miles felt his chest tighten. Leave my daughter out of this. I'm not threatening anyone, Mr. Garrett. I'm simply saying that we all have people we care about, people we want to protect. Sometimes the truth isn't worth the pain it causes. The words hung in the air between them. Hewitt placed a hand on Miles's shoulder, a gesture that to anyone watching would look paternal, almost kind. Be careful, son, Hewitt said softly. This world is more complicated than it appears, and not every battle is worth fighting. He gave Miles's shoulder a gentle squeeze, then walked back toward the church, greeting mourners with the same warm smile he'd worn all afternoon. Miles stood alone in the garden, his heart pounding. The message was clear. Hewitt knew about Emma. He knew how to hurt Miles, and he was willing to do it if necessary. Miles returned to his car and sat in the driver's seat, hands trembling. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. He opened it. It was a photograph. Emma walking out of her high school, laughing with friends, unaware she was being watched. No message, just the photo. Miles stared at the screen, fury and fear warring inside him. They were threatening his daughter. He wanted to scream, to drive straight to Hewitt's house and confront him, to call the police. But he knew it wouldn't matter. Hewitt had protected himself too well. There was no proof, no direct threat, just implications, suggestions, a photograph that could be explained away as coincidence. Miles closed his eyes and forced himself to breathe. Then he opened them, his jaw set. They'd made a mistake. They'd thought threatening Emma would make him back down, but all they'd done was guarantee that he'd never stop. He started the car and drove home, his mind already racing. Through the next steps. Hewitt had just declared war, and Miles was going to finish it. Miles didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table, the photograph of Emma on his phone screen, staring at it until the image burned into his mind. At 5 a.m., Sophie called. I found it, she said, her voice tight with exhaustion. The network, it's all here. Send it to me. 10 minutes later, Miles's inbox pinged. He opened the encrypted file Sophie had sent. What he saw made his stomach turn. Sophie had constructed a visual map, a web of connections spanning 25 years. At the center was Judge Clayton Hewitt. Radiating outward were dozens of names, each linked by thin lines representing favors, rulings, donations, and appointments. Lawyers who'd won improbable cases in Hewitt's courtroom and later donated to political campaigns. Prosecutors who'd inexplicably dropped charges and later received promotions. Business owners who'd been granted favorable rulings and later hired Hewitt's associates. Politicians who'd benefited from Hewitt's endorsements and later appointed judges loyal to him. It wasn't a smoking gun. None of it was technically illegal. But taken together, it painted a picture of systematic corruption hidden behind a veneer of compassion. Miles called Sophie back. "This is incredible work." "It's not enough," Sophie said. "Everything here is circumstantial. Patterns, not proof. A good lawyer would tear it apart in seconds. Then we need something concrete. A witness, a document, something that proves intent." "Miles, we've talked to witnesses. They're all too scared." Miles thought of Diane, Hewitt's assistant, the woman who'd looked so terrified at the press conference, the woman who'd read his message but never replied. "There's one person who might know everything," Miles said, "and I think she's waiting for someone to ask the right question." That afternoon, Miles waited outside the courthouse. At 4:30 p.m., Diane Mercer emerged, walking quickly toward the parking lot. Miles intercepted her. "Ms. Mercer, please. I just need 5 minutes." Diane's face went pale. "I can't talk to you. I know you're scared. I know what he's capable of. But people are being hurt. Children are being used, and you know it." Diane's hands trembled. "You don't understand. If I say anything, I'll protect you. I'll keep you anonymous. No one will know. He'll know." Diane's voice cracked. "He always knows." She tried to walk past him, but Miles stepped in front of her. "The photo of my daughter," Miles said quietly. "Did you know about that?" Diane froze. "Did you know they were following her? Threatening her?" Tears welled in Diane's eyes. I didn't think he'd go that far." "How far has he gone before?" Diane looked around the parking lot, panicked. "Not here, not now." "Then where? When?" She hesitated, then pulled out her phone and typed something. She showed Miles the screen. "Green Lake Park. Tomorrow, 6 a.m. Come. Alone." Then she deleted the message and walked away without looking back. Miles stood in the empty parking lot, his heart racing. Tomorrow he'd finally get the truth, or he'd walk into a trap. Either way, he was out of options. That night, Miles called his ex-wife. "Jennifer, I need you to do something for me." "What's wrong?" Her voice was wary. "Take Emma out of town for a few days. Visit your sister in Ohio. Just get her away from here." "Miles, you're scaring me. What's going on? Please, just trust me." There was a long pause. Then, "Okay, we'll leave tomorrow morning. Thank you." Miles hung up and sat in the darkness of his apartment. Across the street, the black sedan was parked in its usual spot. Miles walked to the window and stared directly at it. Then he raised his middle finger. The message was clear. He wasn't backing down. Inside the sedan, a man in a dark suit watched Miles through tinted windows. He picked up his phone and dialed. "He's not stopping," the man said. On the other end of the line, Judge Clayton Hewitt's voice was calm, measured. "Then we'll need to escalate." "How far?" Hewitt was silent for a moment. Then, "As far as necessary." The line went dead. The article dropped at midnight. Not from Miles, from a national news outlet. The headline read, "Disgraced journalist targets local hero. Miles Garrett's troubling pattern of baseless accusations." Miles read it in disbelief, his hands shaking. The article detailed his past, the Dalton scandal, his failed marriage, his vendetta against public figures. It painted him as bitter, obsessed, willing to destroy good people for clicks and attention. Worse, it included quotes from anonymous sources. "Miles Garrett has been harassing Judge Hewitt's staff for weeks. He shows up, unannounced, makes wild accusations, refuses to accept the truth. This is a man who can't accept that sometimes people are just good. He sees conspiracy everywhere because he can't handle his own failures." The article even mentioned Emma, not by name, but enough to make it clear. Garrett's personal life has been in shambles since his divorce. Perhaps this obsession is a cry for help. Miles's phone exploded with messages, colleagues distancing themselves, former friends expressing concern. His editor, Paul, left a voicemail. "Miles, I warned you. I can't help you anymore. Don't contact me again." By morning, Miles's face was on local television. A psychiatrist was interviewed, suggesting he might be experiencing a mental health crisis. A former colleague claimed Miles had always been unstable. The narrative was set. Miles Garrett was a troubled man attacking an innocent. "Judge," Sophie called, her voice frantic. "Miles, they're destroying you." "I know. What are we going to do?" Miles stared at the laptop screen, at the dozens of articles now piling on, each one echoing the same message. He was the villain. Hewitt was the victim. "We keep going," Miles said, quietly. "Miles," "Sophie, if we stop now, he wins. Everything we've found, everyone who suffered, it all gets buried. I won't let that happen." There was a long silence. "Okay," Sophie said finally, "but we need to be smart. We can't fight them in the media. We need something they can't spin." Miles thought of Diane. The meeting at Green Lake Park was in 2 hours. "I'm working on it." After he hung up, Miles sat in his apartment surrounded by the wreckage of his life. His phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "Dad, are you okay?" "Mom won't tell me what's happening." Miles's chest tightened. He wanted to call her, to hear her voice, to tell her everything would be fine, but he couldn't lie to her. He typed back, "I'm okay, sweetheart. Stay with your mom for a few days. I love you." Her response came immediately. "I love you too. Please be careful." Miles set the phone down. He walked to his bedroom and opened the closet. On the top shelf, in a shoebox, was an old letter, yellowed with age, the handwriting elegant and familiar. His mother's letter, written 15 years ago, just before she died. Miles had found it cleaning out her house. He'd read it once and tucked it away, unable to face the emotions it stirred. Now he pulled it out and read it again. "My dearest Miles, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And knowing you, you're probably in the middle of some fight you can't win. You've always been the boy who couldn't ignore injustice. Even as a child, you'd stand up for the kid. Being bullied, even if it meant getting hurt yourself, it's your greatest strength and it will cost you everything. But here's what I want you to remember. The truth doesn't need you to be perfect. It just needs you to be brave. And you are, my son. You always have been. Don't give up. Not on the truth. Not on yourself. Not on the people who need you. I'm so proud of you. Love always, Mom." Miles folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. Then he stood, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the door. It was time to meet Diane. Green Lake Park was deserted at 6 in the morning. Fog clung to the water, and the only sound was the distant call of birds. Miles walked along the path, scanning the area. Diane sat on a bench near the lake, hunched against the cold, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. Miles approached slowly. "Thank you for coming." She didn't look at him. "I shouldn't be here." "I know." Miles sat beside her. "But you are. That means something." Diane's voice was barely a whisper. "I've worked for him for 15 years. I've seen things, done things, that I can't take back. Tell me." And finally, after 25 years of silence, someone did. Diane spoke for 40 minutes. She told Miles everything. How Hewitt had cultivated a network of obligations over decades. How he'd hand-picked vulnerable people, sick children, desperate families, elderly victims, and turned their suffering into leverage. How every act of compassion was calculated to build his untouchable reputation while securing favors from the powerful. She described the system. Lawyers who owed Hewitt for favorable rulings would later represent his interests. Prosecutors who'd received career boosts would look the other way when Hewitt's associates faced scrutiny. Politicians who'd benefited from his endorsements would protect him from oversight. "It was brilliant," Diane said, her voice hollow. "No one could question him. If you criticized Hewitt, you were attacking someone who helped children, who saved families. You became the monster." "And Evelyn Marsh?" Miles asked. Diane closed her eyes. "That was different. That was personal. Tell me." 3 years ago, a woman named Teresa Vance died of an overdose. She was the daughter of Harold Vance, the prosecutor who went to prison for bribery. Harold was Hewitt's brother-in-law. Teresa was his niece. Miles felt his pulse quicken. The same Vance from the 1998 photograph. Diane nodded. When Harold was convicted, the family fell apart. Teresa spiraled. She had a daughter, Lily. When Teresa died, the child had nowhere to go. Hewitt couldn't take her in. The connection to Harold would have raised questions, damaged his reputation. So he found Evelyn. Yes, Evelyn was a distant acquaintance of Teresa's, elderly, alone, desperate for money. Hewitt arranged for her to care for Lily, paid her, promised her security. But then, Diane's voice cracked. Then he needed something bigger. His name was being floated for a federal judgeship. He needed one more viral moment, one more proof that he was beyond reproach. Miles felt sick. So he staged the whole thing. The traffic stop, the courtroom drama, the donation, all of it. Diane opened her purse and pulled out a flash. Drive. I have recordings, emails, financial records, everything you need. Miles stared at the small device. Why now? Why are you doing this? Tears streamed down Diane's face. Because I saw the photo of your daughter, and I realized he'll never stop. He'll destroy anyone who gets in his way. And I can't be part of that anymore. Miles took the flash drive, his hands trembling. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Diane whispered. Once this comes out, they'll come for me too. I'll protect you. You can't. Diane stood, her face pale. But maybe this will be enough. She walked away quickly, disappearing into the fog. Miles sat alone on the bench, gripping the flash drive. This was it. The proof. The truth. By noon, Sophie had verified everything on the drive. Emails between Hewitt and Evelyn, coaching her on what to say. Financial transfers showing payments for her. Cooperation. Recordings of phone calls where Hewitt discussed managing the narrative. And most damning, a document outlining the staged traffic stop, down to the timing and the specific officer who'd been convinced to participate. This is it, Sophie said, her voice shaking with adrenaline. This ends him. Miles contacted 3 major news outlets simultaneously. Within hours, journalists from across the country were reviewing the evidence. The story broke at 6 p.m. Beloved judge accused of elaborate fraud. Evidence suggests decades of manipulation. The reaction was instantaneous. Shock, outrage, disbelief. Social media exploded. The loudest Judge Hewitt hashtag, which had once celebrated him, now called for his arrest. Other journalists who'd previously defended Hewitt now scrambled to distance themselves. Some admitted they'd been manipulated. Others claimed they'd always had doubts. By evening, the Grafton Falls courthouse issued a statement. Judge Clayton Hewitt had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. By midnight, federal prosecutors announced they were opening a criminal inquiry. Miles watched it all from his apartment, exhausted and numb. His phone rang. It was a producer from a national news network. Mr. Garrett, we'd like to interview you tomorrow morning. The country wants to hear your story. Miles declined politely and hung up. This wasn't about him. It had never been about him. Sophie called. We did it, Miles. We actually did. It's not over yet, Miles said. What do you mean? Hewitt's still out there, and men like him don't go down without a fight. As if on cue, Miles's doorbell rang. He walked to the door and looked through the peephole. 2 FBI agents stood in the hallway. Miles opened the door. Miles. Garrett? The taller agent said. Yes. We need you to come with us. Judge Hewitt has requested protective custody. He claims you've been threatening him and may pose a danger. Miles stared at them in disbelief. Even now, even with everything exposed, Hewitt was fighting back. Am I under arrest? Not yet. But we need to ask you some questions. Miles grabbed his jacket. As he was led out of his apartment, he looked back one last time. On his laptop screen, a news alert flashed. Evelyn Marsh missing. Authorities searching. The final piece was falling into place. And Miles realized the truth was coming, but so was the reckoning. The FBI released Miles after 6 hours of questioning. They had nothing. Hewitt's accusation was a desperate attempt to discredit him, and the agents knew it. By the time Miles walked out of the federal building, the sun was rising on a new day, a day that would change everything. Evelyn Marsh was found that afternoon. She'd been staying at a motel 30 miles outside Grafton Falls, hiding from the media storm. When authorities located her, she agreed to give a statement. A press conference was scheduled for 6 p.m. Miles and Sophie watched it live from his apartment. Evelyn sat at a table in a nondescript conference room, flanked by lawyers. Her face was drawn, her eyes red from crying. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters filled every seat. She began to speak. "My name is Evelyn Marsh, and I need to tell you the truth." The room fell silent. "Everything you saw, the traffic stop, the courtroom, the sick child, it was planned. Judge Hewitt asked me to do it. He paid me. He told me exactly what to say, how to act, when to cry." Her voice broke. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." She described it all, the rehearsals, the payments, the promises that Lily would be cared for. She admitted she'd never driven recklessly to save a dying child. Lily had never been sick. The entire incident was theater, the courtroom scene, the viral video, the $100,000 donation, all of it staged. Miles leaned forward, watching intently. But something felt wrong. Evelyn's delivery was too smooth, her pauses too precise, her emotions perfectly timed for maximum impact. Sophie noticed it too. "She's reading a script again." Miles rewound the footage, watching Evelyn's eyes. They kept darting to the left, just off camera, as if seeking approval. "Someone's coaching her," Miles said. "Even now." The press conference continued. Evelyn's lawyers presented documents, some of which matched what Diane had provided, but others seemed different, altered. A reporter asked, "Ms. Marsh, are you saying you acted alone in this deception?" Evelyn hesitated. Then, "No. Judge Hewitt orchestrated everything. I was just following his instructions." "And the child, Lily, where is she now?" Evelyn's face crumpled. "I don't know. They took her from me. They said if I didn't cooperate, I'd never see her again." "Who is they?" I know their names. People who worked for the judge. People who made sure everything went according to plan." The lawyers ended the press conference abruptly after that. Miles sat back, frustrated. This doesn't make sense. She's confessing, but she's protecting someone. Sophie pulled up her laptop. "I'm going to analyze the documents she presented. If they've been altered, I'll find it." 2 hours later, Sophie called Miles, her voice tight. "The confession is real, but it's incomplete. Some of the emails she referenced don't match the ones Diane gave us. Dates are changed. Names are redacted." "Someone's controlling the narrative," Miles said, "even in her confession." "But who? Hewitt's already been exposed." Miles thought back to the 1998 photograph. The network of powerful men, Harold Vance, Gregory Lamb, and others whose names he still didn't know. "It's not just Hewitt," Miles said slowly. "It never was. He's part of something bigger, and whoever's really in charge is making sure the fall doesn't reach them." That night, Miles received an encrypted email. No sender, no subject line, just a single attachment. He opened it. It was an adoption record from 3 years ago. The child's name, Lily Vance. Mother, Teresa Vance, deceased. Father, unknown. Legal guardian appointed by family court, Evelyn Marsh. Presiding judge, Clayton Hewitt. But there was something else. A second page, partially redacted. Emergency contact, redacted. Secondary guardian in case of Evelyn's incapacity. Redacted. And at the bottom, a handwritten note in the margin. Subject is granddaughter of HV, protect family connection at all costs. CH. Miles stared at the document. Lily wasn't just Teresa's daughter. She was Harold Vance's granddaughter. And Clayton Hewitt's. great-niece. The truth hit Miles like a physical blow. This was never about compassion. It was never about justice. It was about hiding a family secret, about protecting Hewitt's bloodline connection to a convicted criminal, about ensuring that no one ever discovered the judge's ties to corruption. Miles picked up his phone and called Sophie. "I know what this is really about," he said, "and it's worse than we thought." Across town, in a dark office, Clayton Hewitt sat alone. His phone rang. "It's done," a voice said. "Evelyn gave the confession. The media thinks it's over." "And Garrett?" "Still digging. He won't stop." Hewitt closed his eyes. "Then we move to the final option." "Are you sure?" "Do it." The line went dead. Hewitt stood and walked to the window, looking out at Grafton Falls, his town, his kingdom. He'd built it over 25 years, brick by brick, lie by lie. And he wasn't going to let one stubborn journalist tear it down. Not without a fight. The final hearing took place 3 weeks later. Federal prosecutors had moved quickly. The evidence was overwhelming. Emails, recordings, financial transfers, witness testimony. Clayton Hewitt was charged with fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. But on the morning of the hearing, something happened that no one expected. A new document surfaced. A DNA test. Miles received it anonymously, just like the adoption records. He opened it in his car outside the courthouse, his hands shaking. The test confirmed what he'd suspected. Lily was Harold Vance's granddaughter. But there was more. A second test, comparing Lily's DNA to Clayton Hewitt's. The result, 12.5% genetic match, great uncle and great niece. But then Miles saw the third page, a test comparing Lily's DNA to Teresa Vance's. Maternal match confirmed. And finally a fourth test, one that made Miles's blood run cold. Paternal match, Clayton Hewitt Jr. Miles stared at the document, his mind reeling. Clayton Hewitt didn't have a son named Clayton Jr. Not publicly, but Harold Vance did have a son who'd changed his name years ago to distance himself from his father's crimes, a son who'd disappeared from public records. Miles pulled up his old research, cross-referencing names, dates, legal filings, and then he found it. Harold Vance's son had legally changed his name in 2004. His new name, David Mercer. Diane's last name. Miles felt like the ground had opened beneath him. Diane wasn't just Hewitt's assistant. She was family. And Lily wasn't just Hewitt's great-niece through Harold Vance. Lily was Diane's niece. Teresa had been Diane's sister. The entire conspiracy wasn't just about protecting Hewitt's reputation. It was about protecting Diane's child. No, not protecting. Hiding. Because if Lily's true parentage was ever discovered, it would reveal that the Vance family corruption ran deeper than anyone knew. That Diane had been complicit. That the entire network had been working together for decades, using Hewitt's position to shield themselves. Miles sat in his car, the document in his lap, understanding finally clicking into place. Evelyn's confession had been orchestrated not by Hewitt, but by Diane. To take the fall. To close the case, to make sure no one looked deeper. Because the real secret wasn't that Hewitt had staged a viral moment. It was that Lily was the daughter of Teresa Vance and an unnamed father. A father whose identity would destroy what remained of the Vance family legacy. Miles looked up at the courthouse. He had a choice. He could release this information, expose everything, destroy everyone involved. Or he could protect a child who'd already lost everything. Inside the courtroom, the hearing began. Clayton Hewitt stood before the judge, his face calm, resigned. The charges were read. The evidence presented, witnesses testified. Diane sat. In the back row, her face hidden behind sunglasses, clutching a tissue. When it was over, Hewitt was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The courtroom erupted. "Justice," the crowd said. Finally, justice. But Miles sat silent, the DNA results still in his hand. After the sentencing, Miles found Diane in the courthouse bathroom crying. "I know," he said quietly. She looked up, terrified. What do you know? Everything. Miles pulled out the DNA test. Lily's your niece. Teresa was your sister, and you've been protecting her this whole time. Diane's face crumpled. Please. Please. Don't. I'm not going to, Miles said. But you need to tell me the truth. All of it. And so she did. Teresa had fallen in love with the wrong man, a man connected to Harold's criminal network. When she got pregnant, the man disappeared. Teresa spiraled into addiction. When she died, Diane and Hewitt made a decision. They would hide Lily, protect her from the family's toxic legacy, give her a chance at a normal life. The staged incident wasn't about Hewitt's reputation. It was about creating a public narrative that would shield Lily forever. If everyone believed she was Evelyn's great-granddaughter, no one would dig into her real parentage. We were trying to save her, Diane whispered. Miles looked at her for a long time. By lying to the world? By giving her a chance? Miles thought of his own daughter, of the lengths he'd go to protect her. He folded the DNA test and put it in his pocket. Where is she now? He asked. Safe, in a good home, far from here, and she doesn't know any of this. Miles nodded slowly. Then let's keep it that way. Diane stared at him, disbelieving. You're not going to publish it? No. Miles stood. Some truths don't need to be told. Not when they'll only hurt an innocent child. Diane broke down, sobbing. Miles left her there and walked out of the courthouse. 6 months later, Miles published his final article. It detailed Hewitt's crimes, the network of corruption, the decades of manipulation. But it said nothing about Lily's true identity. The article ended with a single line. The truth doesn't liberate. Sometimes it only reveals who always held the chains. Miles visited Lily once, months later. She was living with a kind family in a small town, playing in a backyard, laughing. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know what had been sacrificed to give her that life. And Miles decided that was okay. He turned and walked away, leaving the past behind. Some battles, he realized, aren't won by exposing everything. Sometimes they're won by choosing mercy.